So a few weeks ago, my daughter thought it would be cool if we all sat and watched the Marvel movies all in chronological order, which you can do with Netflix. And I was watching these in a very casual way, and then it started to occur to me that maybe there's a very interesting, not just a spiritual message, but a very practical message. I'm very interested in what someone like Alan Watts would have thought while watching these. But then we don't really, so many of these new everything looks new, but they're very old archetypal themes. And so uh, right off, I got thrown back into the 80s, and I was taking a class on death and dying, So what's a neurotic 20-year-old taking a class on death and dying for? It's probably another video, but our first assignment was to draw death. And I remember saying we actually had class in a church, which I thought was pretty appropriate. And if I had that time stone, I would go back in time, and I think I would draw Thanos. I think, and if as I passed it around to the class, I think people would look and say, "Yeah, it's a really impressive version of death." Because the Grim Reaper was kind of creepy, but after Bill and Ted, it sort of lost its you know emotional power over us. And so, of course, Thanatos, which is Greek for death. I mean, they're not hiding anything here. Um, he has that kind of slow, forceful, powerful inevitability, he often says. And so we wonder, like, is that death? And what I'm going to argue in this video is that it's not death at all. Thanos is not death. Thanos is the thinking mind's projection of what it thinks and believes death is, which of course is the enemy. And in fact, if you look at all the Avengers, the superheroes at least, they have, well, all of them have powers. An interesting thing is they're all reflections of the different aspects of the human experience, blind rage or, you know, the desire for magic. And they all come down to this, power element of wanting to control um, reality. But Tony Stark, I think, stands out as probably the most interesting, at least as far as the video is concerned, but maybe as far as the whole Marvel universe is concerned, because he is so, on the one hand, so absolutely human. He doesn't really have any superhuman powers, except for his thinking mind. And his whole adventure started in a very interesting way. If you remember one of the first Iron Man, well, the first Iron Man movie, his whole trip started with an injury to his heart. And that sort of disconnect between the thinking mind and emotions. And that's one of the things the thinking mind has been doing for a really long time. The thinking mind denounces anything that isn't pure rationality and pure thinking. And that goes way back to Descartes, who forcefully, I think, therefore I am. One says, I feel, therefore I am. And Descartes' ability to regard emotions as very animalistic and the rational mind as equivalent to the very soul itself. And so we see Tony starting this adventure with that kind of technology protecting his emotions, which is really saying that technology is protecting our fear of death. And Tony Stark becomes the embodiment, the symbol of the thinking mind, where all of it goes into technology. Technology will save everyone. And he's such a perfect kind of narcissist, but we like him. But he's also, he has everything, very close to actually having everything. And so he symbolizes that thinking mind tied in with the ego and this notion, if I just have a little bit more, I'll be happy. So what I'm going to suggest here is that Thanos is not death at all. In fact, it's actually Tony Stark, and he's the one who actually creates Thanos, which is to say, the thinking mind creates a projection of what it believes death to be. And that's what Thanos really is. Thanos is not death. Thanos is the thinking mind's projection of what it imagines death to be, which of course is the enemy that must be overcome. And the only way to overcome it is through more technology, more thinking. That's very interesting. If you notice the one scene where, as far as I know, Thanos and Stark never met. And this is the first time they're kind of in the same room together. And Thanos, he says, I know you, you're Stark. And Stark is like, why would you know me? And he says, we're both cursed with knowledge. And, that really goes back to that, you know, um, breaking with innocence. That's, we're all in this kind of Eden, blissful place until we started thinking. And what's Thanos' purpose? And he came right out and he said that there's imbalance in the universe, and his mission is to correct that imbalance. And of course, this is a really interesting question: is there imbalance in the universe, or is the imbalance just something the thinking mind believes is there? So think about it like a crooked picture on a wall. Well, is that really imbalanced? Well, it isn't until a thinking mind looks at it and makes a judgment that, yeah, now, I've got to put it back into balance. And uh, so we've really got to kind of, I think, a real direct way of looking into Thanos' thinking process. And that's what it is. And it's a thinking process. And death isn't sitting there on a mission. It's the thinking mind that's on a mission. Death isn't out there trying to bring balance to the universe. The universe already has balance. And there's another very interesting scene where Thor tries to kill Thanos, and he goes right for the body, and Thanos looks at him and says, "You should have went for the head." That's interesting too, because of course we all think with our skull. We all think, with our head and all the workings inside the skull, and we feel with our body. And that disconnect between the thinking mind and the body is the mission. That's the mission of the thinking mind. And so, what's the real relationship between Stark and Thanos? Well, at the very end, Stark ends up uh, killing Thanos, which is really quite interesting that Stark would do it. That, a mere human would be the one who would conquer death. And the way he does it, of course, they do it through technology. And his last statement, is like, "I am Iron Man," is like, that almost kind of is a reference to that technological revolution when we start manipulating the world with the right hand. And I mentioned this in some other videos, that it's not a coincidence that, Thanos controls the universe with his right hand. And I mean, the glove with the Infinity Stones on it, because we've known in the left-right brain research for 50 plus years that the left side of the brain controls the right hand. And that's why so much of the world is right-handed, because we tend to rely on language and the processes of the left brain, which seem to be so epitomized and focused in the character of Tony, but not just Tony Stark, but in his projection of Thanos. And that's why Thanos has the uh, Infinity Stones on his right hand, and that's why, he, with a thought, he can end and change reality. And of course, this is what Tony ends up commanding. His thinking mind ends up having the command over reality, which is, of course, the absolute ultimate goal of thinking minds. To snap your fingers, which is to say, I can just have a thought in the left mind, and reality will obey. But in the end, what happens? Well, Tony ends up killing Thanos, but does he really? What really happens here? Is it a message that the ultimate mission of the thinking mind is self-destruction? Will the thinking mind end up simply annihilating itself? And so, in my first book, I actually open up with a quote by Robert Oppenheimer. And it initially sounds really depressing, in a way, just like some of the last versions of the Marvel movies, but it's not. I think it's just a hint, it's a message, it's an important one. So Oppenheimer put it this way: he said, "It's perfectly obvious the whole world is going to hell. And the only possible chance that it may not is if we do not attempt to stop it from doing so." So, this is the classic: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The thinking mind believes that it can annihilate death if it just thinks enough, if it just creates enough, if it just manipulates the world in just the right way, it can conquer death. But it's not. It's not conquering death at all. It's not conquering nature. What it's ultimately doing is fighting a projection of its own processes. And that's what the thinking mind is doing. It just doesn't see it. So, what we can take from this is the realization that Tony and, you know, technology and the Iron Man suit and all of his battles, including the battles with Thanos, they're all part of it. They're all part of the process. They're all part of nature. There's no such thing as an artificial lake. The earth grew us. As Alan Watts put it, just as an apple tree apples, the earth peoples. So we're just as much of nature as anything else. But we have these thinking minds that creates this illusion that there's this battle between us and nature, a battle between us and death, and it has to be conquered. But the only uh, real battle is in seeing that it was never a battle in the first place.